and this is My Slovak Experience. Dobrý deň everybody, I am Emanuele Terenzani and this is the first episode of My Slovak Experience podcast. The first guest is Paul Burt, an Englishman who has lived in Slovakia for more than a decade, and he has had the chance to see Bratislava and the business here grow. And now he can tell us in the interview what he remembers about the transformation that Slovakia has been through. Paul is currently the managing director of the IBM International Services Centre in Bratislava. It's a company that employs thousands of people in the Slovak capital, and many of them, of course, are foreigners. So now, without further delays, I'm very happy to present you the interview with Paul Burt. I hope you enjoy. I'm here with Paul Burt. Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
You've been living in Slovakia for quite a while, right? How many years?
I came here in 2003.
So that makes
15 years.
15 years of living in this country. Right?
Yes.
So you've been living all the time in this country?
Constantly in that time. In fact, even in the first 8 years, I come from UK, but in the first 8 years, I didn't even go back to UK once. So, no, really settled here.
Okay, so actually the most important question is to ask is why Slovakia?
Oh, well, actually, there's a little bit of a funny story behind that. I mean, the simple answer is Slovakia, because IBM asked me, or I volunteered actually to come here with work. But it goes even back a little bit further than that. As a child, my parents, when I was a young kid, bought me a jigsaw puzzle. It was one of these wooden jigsaw puzzles, and the puzzle was a map of Europe.
Okay.
And each piece of the puzzle was the shape of a different country in Europe, and it was my favorite puzzle. And my favorite piece on that puzzle was always Czechoslovakia.
Okay.
As it was at that time. I don't know why exactly, maybe because it was kind of a very unusual shape for a country. You know, it was the two countries together and only actually joined by a small amount, right?
Country, yeah.
Maybe something to do with the spelling, because there's such an unusual look of the name of a country for at least somebody coming from the UK. But so there was always something a little bit special about this part of the world, even from my younger age. So when there was the opportunity to come out here, I jumped at it, originally thinking it would only be for 1 year, but then of course things changed.
So it started with a job opportunity.
Exactly, yeah. So I was asked to come out here for 1 year to help train new people.
So before you were working in England?
In UK, yeah. So I was an employee in IBM UK. Before I came here and transferred with the company to help set up the international centers here.
And so tell me, what about your first years when you came here, right? For example, the first impression you had about coming to this country.
My first impression, well, my very first impression, the intention had been that, because I was coming out here on an assignment with work, the intention was that you're supposed to be able to come out for what they call a look-see trip first, which is a few weeks before you actually move here. You can come and visit for a few days and just get a feel for the area. It also helps with planning, where do you want to live and what kind of part of the city and so on. But because in my case it all happened very, very quickly and very last minute, actually, I didn't get the look-see trip. So my first impression was when I came here full-time, and I flew into Vienna Airport that first time, and a taxi picked me up from Vienna Airport and brought me across to Slovakia from there. And I remember as we came through Heinberg and Wolfstal, and we were approaching the Slovak border there, my taxi driver, who didn't speak any English, he just pointed over towards the one bit of Bratislava that we could kind of already see, which was Dlhé diely. and just pointed at that and said Bratislava. So that was my first impression, was looking at that kind of massive high-rise buildings on the hill there and thinking, oh wow, that looks really interesting. And I was a little bit nervous, I have to say. So, and this was dark, it was at night time. So we drove in, he dropped me off at what was the Hotel Forum, it's now the Crown Plaza, opposite the President's Palace. Which was where I was staying for, well, it was supposed to be the first few days, ended up being weeks in the end. I really didn't have any orientation of where that was, so I kind of didn't know if where I was in the middle of all of that he'd pointed at and shown me, or if that was a completely different part of the city. And that first night I booked into the hotel, I put down my bags, and I thought, okay, I should go out and have a look. And I think I managed to walk around one block before I ran and hid back into my hotel room, because I was just there by myself and I didn't know where I was.
So that's how you came, that nobody else, is you and
it was
job opportunity.
Just me, and
So
everybody else joined later.
In 15 years, what are maybe one thing you noticed that really transformed or changed a lot?
Well, I mean, the investment into the city of Bratislava itself has been significant over the last 15 years. The city has changed a lot, I think, mostly in good ways, mostly for the good. But we have also lost quite a few green spaces in the city that have been converted into office blocks and so on. So it's a mixed bag. There's a lot more money around Bratislava than there was 15 years ago. It's evident in particularly driving around in cars. I remember being struck over time with how cars had changed in the city. When I first came here, there were a lot more older, visibly damaged or rusted, smaller cars running around the city. These days it's all new cars, it's big SUVs, it's that there's just visibly a lot more money around the city these days.
So you're talking about the business that grew up, so you're also part of a business here, right? So you are currently the managing director in IBM. That is one of probably the biggest service,
it's the largest shared service center in Slovakia. Yeah.
So and how do you see the area where you are expert in, and you are working in, like the growth in this last year?
So the shared services over those 15 years has also grown massively. I mean, we were one of the first companies to come here to establish centers. We started at that time with about 50 people. And other companies have started with similar sizes. Nowadays, the shared services industry as a whole is around 30,000 people, in 30,000 employees in Slovakia. There are more than 30 shared services centres, ranging from some of the smallest are around kind of that 50 people size, through to some which are like us, thousands of people. So the growth has been enormous.
So you actually lived it in your skin, right? So you came here as a foreigner from a different country, right? I know personally, I also came like 9 years ago to Slovakia, and
right.
I had and I always have my opinion about why you should come to Slovakia, or if I should move from my own country and do several efforts, maybe to understand, or it's a challenge for an individual. So what would you say to who is deciding or wondering or living not in Slovakia? Would you suggest to come here, or would you not, or what would you tell them?
Yeah, so I mean, I can talk about the things that have attracted me perhaps to stay. As I say, my motivation to come here initially, or to volunteer to come here initially, was based on kind of curiosity and interest, and a desire to see another part of the world, and this area of the world in particular was interesting to me anyway. And with the job opportunities, that was fine and great, and a good chance to come and see. But I never expected I would stay this long when I made that move. So the things that have caused me to stay really focus around the quality of life here for me. Obviously, that there have been work opportunities as well that have helped, but that could have happened anywhere in the world. The thing that really makes Slovakia feel like home is the quality of life. I like the pace of life here, and I can only really compare and contrast to UK, but there are silly things that make significant differences for me.
Bring me a couple of them.
So one thing would be, for example, car insurance. Here it is much simpler and much more sensible, and you maybe don't think about car insurance as being something that can improve the quality of your life. But if you compare in UK, the system is that you insure the person to drive a particular car. So it's the person that has the insurance, and they are insured to drive their specific car. And what that means is that nobody else can drive your car, and you can't drive anybody else's car unless you start going and adding additional policies each time to your insurance. So you could have
like car plus X, one person, and then you can...
Right, I mean, you can start building in these things, but then you're paying more and more on top for every time you want to build up those options. So even simple things like if you want to go out for a drink somewhere with some friends, once you're the person who picks up the car keys and takes your car, in most cases that means you can't then just give your keys to anybody else. Here in Slovakia, it's so much more sensibly done. You insure the car, and the car is insured for whoever you give permission to drive it. And it's just little silly things like that. Just you don't have to think so much about those silly little complex details. You can just live life. Another thing, I'm very much into nature. I enjoy being out in nature a lot. Slovakia has a significant number of national parks, some very, very beautiful ones, some beautiful scenery. And again, comparing to UK, it's the openness of that. It's the availability of that. Just an example, where I live, I'm near to a small river called the Chernavoda. And if I want to, I can go up to the Chernavoda and I can walk for tens of kilometers along the river on either side of the bank with nobody to stop me and nobody to interfere, and I can just walk, and it's open, and it's just nice, and it's freely available. If I go to UK, 95% of riverbanks are private property, closed off to the public. So if you want to go for a walk along the river, you're going to the same 1,000-meter slot that 50,000 other people are trying to get to. And just that quality of the experience is very, very different.
And so what is there something in particular that you like about Slovakia on top of this?
Particular things that I like about Slovakia,
on top of this simplicity that is behind it.
I mean, it's for me, it's a big advantage being part of the European Union. I'm also, I know some people don't like it, but I'm a fan of the single currency as well. The freedom of being able to move around. So Slovakia is brilliantly placed from that point of view. There's 4 or 5 capital cities you can reach within 5 hours drive of here. And there's much more that you can go if you're willing to drive a little bit further than that. So its central location is also ideal, not just for exploring Slovakia and getting out into the nature and things here, but also then there's plenty of other opportunities out there that really, just hop in a car and go exploring. It's ideal for that.
So you've been working in IBM mostly all this time, right? So it's
correct.
Since you started, so you didn't change.
I have not. No, I've changed roles within IBM.
Yeah, but you didn't change the company or either. So would you still
all.
be living in Slovakia without IBM?
I think I would. Yes, I believe I would. As I said, this is home not because of the job. And actually, another interesting thing here, another reason why Slovakia is very attractive here to me is that I don't live in Bratislava. I live a few tens of kilometers outside of Bratislava. And one of the main reasons for that is that I have kids, and I wanted to try and get a house with a garden rather than being in an apartment within the city. That's just a personal preference. And if I compare costs of housing and mortgages to somewhere like UK, if I think 30, 40 kilometers outside of the capital city, London, in UK, what I would be paying for a house with a garden there compared to what I can get here in Slovakia, 30, 40 kilometers outside of the capital city, it's different worlds. So again, from that point of view, the quality of life is better here for me in terms of how far my Slovak euro stretches compared to what my UK pound would.
And is there, so let's maybe bring some constructive part of it. So is there anything instead that it still has to be improved?
Yes, I would definitely say there's still room for improvement here in Slovakia.
If you have a magic wand now, what would you change or improve from today?
If I had a magic wand, well, first of all, I would say one thing that I have seen great improvement in already. One thing where somebody already seems to have waved a magic wand, and it's worked very well. Generally, services in the country are greatly improved. If you were here 15 years ago and you were trying to just do something as simple as buy something in a shop, with or without the language skill, the service behaviors were somewhat lacking, honestly said. Over the last 15 years, I think maybe because of the growth, I don't know, but the behaviors have changed, and it's a much more pleasant experience to get services here in Slovakia.
So service, you're not talking about the service centers,
No.
kind of jobs in
But I'm talking
multinational
about
companies, but more like, going to the shop.
General life, exactly.
Waiting.
Going to the life, going to the cinema, at a restaurant, those kind of things where just in your normal outside life, you are paying as an individual for a service. Those experiences are much better than they were 15 years ago. I think the one area that I would say really still needs major overhaul here in Slovakia is the education system.
Okay.
And I think it's adequate, and I don't want to make any suggestion here that it's not. But when I look at the capabilities of what it could be, I think Slovakia is still a long way off what it could achieve. Some of that is driven by some older bureaucratic processes around the way the education system works. Some of it is driven by some older schooling techniques still being used. It's visible in that. In fact, Slovakia has struggled in the last few years of polls to get any single university into the top 500 in the world.
Okay.
Which, given that there are, I think, 36 or something different universities in Slovakia, if you take all of the little branch offices and everything that's around the country as well, which is a huge number for a population of 6 million people. I think there is work that can be done to consolidate that and to improve. It generally improved the standard of teaching that's happening there to bring it to a more modern way.
But obviously the business you are representing, part of it, is actually the ultimate destination for a university student, right? It's like you studied to have a place to in the working area, right? So to work and to be prepared. So how strong can be the business to push for a education reformation?
Well, and again, I think this is an interesting point that there's a fundamental difference in how the universities see themselves and how perhaps the business world sees the need from the universities. Most universities are still, that although they're turning out thousands of graduates a year, the thinking tends to be focused rather on the people who come to university should be focused on going into research going forward. So really to remain within the academic world.
Okay.
So they're not preparing people for the business world. And I think one of the changes that we need to work on and see is to say, well, either, and that's a noble quest, right? We absolutely always need those people that are going into the research fields because a lot of them are the people that are driving new ways of thought and new ideas, and that's fantastic. We need that as well. We don't necessarily need the tens of thousands that we're talking about, and there aren't the opportunities for those tens of thousands. That's the point. So, which is why a lot of them then actually come into the business world. So there either needs to be a change in the thought process in universities that says, okay, it needs to be able to support the needs of both academia going forward, long-term research, and the business world, or we need to start changing the way people think in Slovakia, which today it's very common that everybody goes to university after high school because it's just the done thing to do.
Okay.
And maybe we need to start thinking about, in fact, are there other routes available of further education, not just the university route, where we can prepare people for the business world as well.
What else do you follow around Slovakia, right? So are you, for example, following the news or what is happening on politics as a foreigner?
Not really. I tend to be focused a little bit more on the natural world side of things. So my interest tends to be on, for example, one of the things that I was following was there's been a growth in the beaver population here in Slovakia, and it's been observed that they're gradually working their way down the Danube river and spreading out from there. So, one of the things that I'm interested in is just observing and watching how that spread is working. And then, as I say, I like to go out in nature, so it's interesting then to actually see the physical effects of the beavers being around as well. You see the dams and the trees that they've brought down, and just how it changes the overall environment.
The source of your information is like local news, or what are the sources?
Some of it is local news, although mostly it tends to be websites. There are websites out there mostly in Slovak language, which it makes it a little bit hard going for me. But because of there's also a lot of scientific terminology used in those articles, and that can be hard going for a non-native. But there's also a lot of pictures, so that helps. Pictures are always easy to follow. But no, mostly websites.
And hovoríš po slovensky?
No, jasné. Trošku.
And that's actually important. How many foreigners do you think are willing to learn Slovak that are living here?
My observation is generally people are willing to learn a few basics to get around. I don't see a lot of drive from people to really learn the language in depth. There are some. There are some people who really do, and I've met some foreigners who really excel at the language fantastically. But on the whole, most of them, I would say no. For a few reasons. One, again, they tend to work in international companies where the English language tends to be the spoken language, both written and verbal. And because, in a lot of cases, because of the communities that form here, a lot of people automatically kind of orient towards foreigner communities. There are foreigner websites. So in some cases, people get together as a community or a culture from a particular country, and then they can converse in their own language. Or, as I say, in mixed groups where they tend to use English. So now, generally, I think it's a little bit weak. On the other hand, I've also personally experienced a couple of times, some of the Slovak language courses, and again, I find that they're not the most effective in the world, so it can be hard. And I've used all sorts of things from books and CDs. I've got some stuff downloaded on my phone that I listen to while I'm in the car. I've had 2 different types of Slovak lessons, and then just generally getting out there and trying it and learning it. But The grammar is very hard. The grammar is probably the biggest challenge for most people.
And do you have the opportunity to practice during your days?
At work, not so much, again, because most of the working time is done in English language. Occasionally, yes, you get the chance, but at home, more so. I'm married to a Slovak, so we occasionally use Slovak in the house. And in fact, with our kids, she speaks Slovak to them, and I speak English to them, so they grow up bilingual. Probably my biggest advantage, I would say, is that my parents-in-law don't speak English.
Okay.
So with them, I have to speak in Slovak. So that helps because I'm kind of forced then to converse with them in their native language.
But when you're back into the UK for a while, then that looks cool, right? Your knowledge of Slovak.
Well, the last time I went back to back to UK, sorry, my old school friends told me that I've picked up an accent. So I've been here so long, and I go back to UK so rarely that they actually claim that they can hear a slight foreign accent in my English now.
How much Slovak do you feel now after many years? And also compared to your being, a UK citizen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, I am still a UK citizen. I have the British passport, which, of course, will be interesting in a few months' time when Brexit kicks in. But in terms of, Slovakia is home for me, definitely. I feel more at home in Slovakia than I do in UK these days. Part of that's maybe because, I'm not your typical Englishman.
Okay.
In that, number one, I don't drink tea. Number two, I don't like football. So it's very hard to get by in England if you don't like tea or football.
Okay.
So to come to somewhere like Slovakia where those things can be forgiven was a lot easier. And my family is Slovak. So obviously my wife, but my kids were born here. They have Slovak passports. They go to Slovak state schools. Okay. So I live in a small village where I'm one of a very, very small number of foreigners that live there. So I live outside of work in a Slovak community as well. So
how is the relationship with? Not in the office where you have a foreigner environment, people speak English, but in the little village or with people that have like low possibility to have exchange with foreigners.
Yeah. I find them very welcoming, very welcoming. I have to say people are always very pleased when I'm trying to converse with them in Slovak, but they treat me very nicely. I'm almost a little pet in the village, the little pet Englishman. And it's quite funny if I'm on the phone, if I'm asking somebody to come to my house, if I need a plumber or an electrician or somebody in the village to come to my house, and I phone them up and ask them if they can come over. Because it's one of these villages where there are no real street names and the numbers are a bit mixed over. It's hard to be able to say, and this is my house number in the village, and they don't really know where that is. Yeah. So I'm trying to describe where they should come in the village, and in the end I just say Anglichan, the Englishman, and they okay, now I know. So then they come. It brings a little bit of fame with it in the village as well. But no, it's nice, and I get invited to the village fairs and fetes and things that go on. Actually, one of our neighbours is the godparent of our children. So, no, it's very comfortable for me.
So, positive experience.
Very positive. Very, very positive.
And that's good because one of the, there is, I think in the last years, guys, if you read Slovak news and so on, there are several concerns about more less openness towards foreigners, more like kind of sided extremism, political parties in the government and so on. There is a kind of this kind of conversation going on.
Absolutely.
Right? And I know you, particularly also with IBM, you are advocating, right? I saw also on Facebook page and so on, right? That you're advocating diversity as something
very
important,
much.
right? That is the opposite side. So what Do you think it is really still important to advocate diversity in Slovakia, and where it's lacking or what has to be done?
Very much so. I mean, there are always pockets, and I think first of all, I would say, this is not a situation unique to Slovakia. There's a trend across Europe as a whole in the last years for more right-wing political parties and right-wing groups to be popping up here and there for a mixture of different reasons, I think. But that's the reality that we have to accept, that they are there. One of the things that I personally found interesting here in Slovakia, recently you talked about the political parties. So we had Mr. Kotleba, obviously was successful a few years back in being elected in Banska Bystrica. But one of the, and more recently, in the more recent elections, he's then been actually voted out again. And that was an interesting dynamic for me, because when you look at the numbers there, that what happened, my impression is very much that in the first election where he got voted in, the voter turnout was relatively low, and the demographic didn't include a lot of younger people voting. And and as a consequence, I think he got voted in. There were people who felt strongly on topics. He appeared to be supporting them on those topics, and those were the people that voted. And a lot of other people who perhaps had different opinions simply didn't vote. They perhaps didn't think it was important for them to vote. A few years later, you see the elections came round again. The voter turnout was much higher. The demographic distribution of the voters was very different, and suddenly you found that actually he was voted out again. So I think that just one small example, maybe not such a small example, but one example of, I think, an awakening that's happening in the Slovak population as well, of a need for people to be present and to speak out and to use their constitutional powers when they have the opportunity to make sure that Slovakia is the country they want it to be. And yes, IBM, so you said about IBM and the Facebook pages and so on. Absolutely, diversity is one of our absolute key values in IBM. It's something that we've always cherished, and we have a very, very long and rich history of cherishing diversity. There are many examples where IBM as a company has taken proactive steps to encourage diversity ahead of legal changes that perhaps happen even decades later in some cases to help try and force those equal opportunities. So a very strong track record and a very important part of the values for IBM. We will be present on the market here and continue to be present and to advocate for diversity in all of its forms. It only brings more creative thought, more interesting ideas, and a more pleasant and varied environment in which to live and work.
What is missing, or why is it so important to keep advocating diversity? Right? What's the thing to improve from the current status quo?
Well, I think it's a journey. It's not a destination. It's not something that we probably ever reach the end of. And one of the reasons for that is that societies and cultures and economies are constantly in a change of change and flux, and so you adapt to those as you can. But I think one area in particular, from personal experience, one area that I think there's still a long way to go is certainly with people with disabilities. And actually, again, I would say that this is an area that has shown improvement in Slovakia in the 15 years that I have been here, in that I observed quite a lot of stigma around people with disabilities when I first came here in the first few years. Not anything really, overtly significant, but there was a stigma attached to people with disabilities. There was, even for people with disabilities, a reluctance. If they could hide it, then they would prefer to hide it than for other people to be aware of it. 15 years later, there's still some element of that, but I think it's much improved from where it was. However, one of the experiences that I've had was as an English native speaker here in Slovakia. One of my advantages, one of the things that I can contribute to society is my English language skill. So I did some volunteering work with a school for children with hearing disabilities, where basically just gave them the opportunity to speak with a native English speaker, to help hone their English skills, and hopefully that would give them more opportunities also going forward. But one of the things that I observed was that many of those children really, that they weren't setting the bar high enough for themselves. Their own aspirations in terms of what they were capable of, or what they could be capable of, were much lower than what I perceived in them. Some of them, in particular, some of them had very, very good English language skills already, beyond anything I had expected, and very bright children, of course. The opportunities for them, I think, were virtually endless, and yet because of their disability, somehow they themselves felt that
self-discouraged themselves.
Right, they didn't have the opportunities that other people would have. So there's still work to do there, I'm sure. So
the importance of advocating for diversity, if you are an individual or a company, is not only for to share your own personal positive view that diversity is better because it's enriching, making us more creative and so on, but also for making sure that more people are actually getting benefits from this acceptance.
Absolutely.
Of living all together.
Absolutely, yeah. And as I say, it's not always necessarily acceptance from other people. Sometimes it's that acceptance from within themselves that actually it's okay to be who I am, and I can still be very, very successful and do anything that I want. And that there are people out there that can help with that.
How can we, all condensate into a message for other foreigners or for Slovaks? Like, why is it important to be open-minded?
One thing that I would say to anybody who's already here is, you have to get out there and be part of the community. It's great that Slovakia has opportunities, as I said earlier, for communities of foreigners to get together. And that in itself creates brilliantly diverse and interesting groups and opportunities that people can take advantage of. But it's also important to make sure that you are integrating with the local community and the local culture as well. And you can do that in all sorts of different ways. It doesn't necessarily mean having to go out onto the streets of Bratislava and start randomly walking up to people and making conversations with them. But there are sports clubs or other interest groups. Yeah. Many of them are on Facebook. You can find them that just provide these opportunities. I myself use sports mostly. I tend to get involved in things like swimming, cycling, running, and I join in with groups that are doing that. Very few of whom speak English, and it's a little bit tough to start with sometimes.
It's an opportunity to learn or practice.
Yeah. But exactly, if you've got common topics that you can start as a foundation. So if it's cycling, even without the language, you can still manage to communicate with many people about cycling if you're both knowledgeable about cycling. So again, that's over time. The language skills will follow and build up as well. So that would be probably my biggest recommendation for foreigners who are coming here with the intention to stay here for a period of time is look for those opportunities where you can engage with the community.
Because as a foreigner, you not necessarily embrace diversity if you just go out with people of your
Exactly.
same
It works both ways, right?
Yes.
It absolutely works both ways.
Okay. And maybe we can get out at the last part of this podcast. So I would like to know, what are you doing when you're not managing director of IBM?
So when I'm not at work, then my time is very much split between family and sport and nature. The sport and nature.
Your favorite sport in this case? What are you?
Well,
practicing?
I said the swimming, cycling, and running, so I do triathlon.
Triathlon. So all the three at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what I enjoy, and again, it's great because it suits. I started in Slovakia. It wasn't something that I was doing before I came to Slovakia. I could swim and I could bike and I could run, but it never occurred to me to combine them all until I came here. But Slovakia, although it doesn't have a sea coast, there are so many inland lakes, and the water quality is so great in many of them. It's fantastic to be able to get out and do open water swimming here. And then the cycling, as I say, there's so much green and so much countryside around Slovakia, and so much of it, if you're willing to get on a mountain bike or so on, is accessible to the general public, that you can explore for miles and miles and miles and never get to the end of it. So that combines nicely my interest in being outdoors in nature and doing a little bit of sport for health as well. So my family is also very active. We all like to get out on our bikes together at the weekends, and we usually take a picnic somewhere and enjoy. The summers here are beautiful. That's the other nice thing about Slovakia. For distinct seasons, you really have a proper spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Exactly, yeah. So that's great that you can get out different times of year and really see Slovakia in its different forms and shapes.
And your favorite food here in Slovakia?
My favorite food, actually, I have to say I am a big fan of all Slovak foods.
Okay.
Except for one, which I just don't get on with, and that's langos.
Okay.
There's nothing specific about it, but I just...
Too much garlic?
It's not. No, I love garlic. I love garlic. I think the thing with langos for me is that it's only good if it's really, really fresh. And for me, I can't eat it kind of quick enough. It goes stale too quickly in my hands to really properly enjoy it. So that's the one that I avoid. But anything else here, I mean, the number one probably has to be brinzové halušky.
Okay.
When it's done very well, then that's really great.
And regarding drink, what's your favorite drink here?
For drink, I have the occasional zlatý bazant. It's not tea, no. The occasional zlatý bazant beer. Generally, I'm not too fussy with the drinks. That's whatever's available, and other people are having koffela. When I'm out with the triathlon guys, we quite often stop for a koffela somewhere.
You bring koffela also to the UK when you go?
I've never brought any back to UK, but whenever anybody comes here, I do insist that they try it at least once.
Is that a weird taste for you or interesting?
I like koffela. I mean, I find it very difficult to describe it to anybody. That's why when people come over from UK, family, what have you, I really say to them, I just can't describe to you what this drink is. You just have to try it, because the people see it and the first thing, it's something like Coke, right? And it's nothing like Coke at all. So you just have to try it and give it a go.
Okay, so that's something, call to action for everybody that didn't try it yet. Is there anything you would like to share with our listeners, or that we haven't talked about?
Nothing comes to mind immediately. I would just say that generally, if anybody's thinking about a place to come and explore, then getting out and about in Slovakia is one of the best decisions you can make. I think it really has such a wide range of opportunities and very, very friendly people. So come out and meet them.
Thank you, Paul, for sharing with us.
Thank you.
Is it any place where people can reach out to you in case they want to, get in touch or ask a question or something?
Yeah, I'm out there on LinkedIn, so if anybody's looking to connect with me, then you can find me on LinkedIn.
Okay. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks very much.
Thank you everyone for listening to my Slovak experience. See you at the next interview. Till then, have fun, share,